And for the last 5.5 years, we have been
And McCarthy says he won't try to push himself back in. Liam Donovan is a Republican strategist who's here with us now. Liam, if such a small group of Republicans was able to topple the speaker, what does it say about the GOP's ability to lead?
Well, I think this is overdetermined in some ways. This has been on a collision course since January. The fact that it did take the 15 rounds that you mentioned, we always knew that there was going to be this empowered rump that had a nihilistic streak, and if joined by all Democrats, this was always going to be the case. So I think the fact that Kevin McCarthy did the right thing in multiple instances, forced this is unfortunate, and it changes the incentives going forward. But it does, force sort of a reckoning within the Republican Party. I do think the way this shook out probably galvanizes the party to some degree. I think there is a level of unity for all but the 8 members that sort of prompted this mutiny. We'll have to see what they do in resettling themselves around a new speaker, but it's something that I think is all too predictable and yet so abrupt that people are still catching their breath.
So GOP voters shouldn't question the ability to lead for the party right now?
Well, I think in this case, it's a question: how do you get around this determined rump who, in the current setup of a House majority, if you can't marshal a majority at any given time, you're going to have challenges leading. And so it becomes a question of when speakers step up and put must pass legislation on the floor, is that going to risk their job every time? And I think looking forward, it does seem to be the case that if you make a deal, then there are going to be a handful of people that look to take you down. So I think there has to be some understanding between the minority and the majority that we're not going to punish people for doing the right thing.
Now, in case people don't know, you don't have to be a House member to be House Speaker. That's why some Republicans might want to see Donald Trump become the next Speaker. Who's on your list, Liam?
Well, I think you have to look at leadership to begin with, and I think we've already begun to see the machinations begin with particularly leader Steve Scalise. I think there were some questions regarding his health status, but the fact that he's going for it, making the calls, suggests that he'd be sort of the leader in the clubhouse. Other members of leadership have begun to endorse him. He's making the rounds, but there's always going to be other names, and I think you're hearing people like Jim Jordan, who's the chair of the Judiciary Committee. I think somebody who is considered kind of a conservative stalwart, and maybe somebody who's been on the lips of people in previous speaker fights. He seems to be potentially interested, which is a little bit of a surprise to me. There could be some dark horses, but I think people are going to watch what the big names do before they really make any aggressive moves right now.
I mean, every single seat in the House is up for grabs. I mean, how's the GOP going to play with voters in elections this next year? I mean, the infighting, how's that going to play?
Yeah, well, like I said, I think the fact that there was a lockstep move by Democrats to go after McCarthy in an interesting way, I think does allow them to have a rallying cry. It gives them this sense that McCarthy was sort of martyred for doing his job. I think Democrats have a certainly different view of things, but I do think that will help to unify the remaining members. And again, it's still that handful of members that have just completely contorted incentives, are looking for attention, are looking to raise money from their own right, less interested in supporting the team. But at the end of the day, I think keeping things on the rails, keeping the attention on Joe Biden's administration is going to be the key for keeping the House and potentially growing it to a point where you're not constantly under threat of a handful of members.
Liam Donovan is a Republican strategist. Liam, thanks.
Thanks.
Roman Catholic leaders are meeting at the Vatican starting today to discuss the future of the church.
Among the topics on the agenda, being more responsive to laity's concerns, women in ministry, and being more welcoming of divorced and LGBTQ Catholics.
Joining us to discuss the meeting is NPR religion correspondent Jason DeRose. Jason, so help us understand what this meeting is actually about.
Well, the term the Vatican is using is a synod on synodality, which is a big term, which essentially means it's a series of conversations about how the church conceives of itself, listens to itself. This month's meeting is part of a several-year-long process of listening. Local Catholic parishes began holding listening sessions back in 2021 and 2022, and then reports from those listening sessions went to dioceses and archdioceses, and then on to the Vatican. And the report that summarized those sessions came out this summer. It was called Making the Tent Bigger.
Okay, so the church did a lot of listening. What did they wind up hearing?
Well, laity said they wanted a church that takes them seriously, a more responsive church, a more bottom-up than top-down approach. I spoke with Professor Massimo Fagioli of Villanova University in Pennsylvania, who says that sentiment matches a metaphor Pope Francis has used during his time leading Roman Catholics.
It's a church as a mother. It makes no differences between their children, whether they are sinners or saints, gays or straight, it makes no difference.
And that's an image that has resonated with so many during Francis's papacy, mother rather than stern father. Still, there are some conservatives in the church who aren't happy with the direction or the tone that Francis has set. They say all these conversations, all this openness and possibility of change only confuses the faithful.
Okay, so then what were the topics lay Catholics said they specifically wanted the church to think about differently?
Well, the first and one that's been given a lot of attention is the role of women in ministry. This synod at the Vatican will discuss the possibility of allowing women to become deacons in the Catholic Church. Right now, that's a role restricted only to men. Now, deacons can preach and teach and baptize, but unlike priests, they aren't allowed to preside at communion or hear confessions. It's important to note that at this synod, for the first time, there will be women taking part. About 10% of the delegates are women. Another issue that came out during these listening sessions was that the laity want the church to be more welcoming of all Catholics, especially divorced Catholics and LGBTQ Catholics. Many priests still deny communion for divorced and remarried. And the official Catholic teaching is that homosexuality is intrinsically disordered, which is not exactly welcoming for lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. Other topics that could be on the table: married priests and the possibility of blessing same-sex couples.
Okay, now any decisions expected to come out from this synod?
Well, nothing right away. This is a process that moves at the speed of church, which is to say, slowly. The meeting starting today continues until the end of October, and then the Synod on Synodality is actually continuing next October, when delegates will go back to the Vatican and vote on some sort of official document. That would then go up to Vatican hierarchy and the Pope himself. Any actual change would come down after that. So it'll be a while, but what comes of it could be defining for Francis's legacy.
All right, that's NPR religion correspondent Jason DeRose. Jason, thanks.
You're welcome.
This is NPR News.
Morning, it's 8:43. This is 91.7 WPXU. Charities last year saw a steep decline in giving by the affluent, with donations to charities by wealthy households falling about 20% to around $35,000 each. Also, the athletic shoe industry is a growing market. It's expected to more than triple globally by 2030. But it's also entering a sort of uncertain moment, with juggernaut Nike vying for more market share. Those stories in 10 minutes on the Marketplace Morning Report. The rolling suspension bridge is closed because of a group of climate protesters shutting it down. Southbound 75 before Galbraith, there's a wreck on the right shoulder. Traffic is slow from Glendale Milford. Eastbound 275 after Mosteller, there's a wreck on the right shoulder. Traffic is slow from 75.
Music lovers, Radio Artifact is Cincinnati's home for local music and is now available through your Amazon app. Enable the Radio Artifact skill and ask Alexa to open Radio Artifact.
Support comes from Chamber Music Cincinnati. The Kronos Quartet returns on its 50th anniversary tour. One of the BBC's 10 greatest string quartets of all time, Kronos performs works written expressly for them by Steve Reich, Philip Glass, Bryce Dessner, and more. Tuesday, October 10th at Memorial Hall. Tickets at cincychamber.org.
9 first morning weather, mostly sunny to mostly cloudy today. The high 86, cloudy and warm tonight, down to 64, and tomorrow just a little bit cooler. It'll start out cloudy with some rain in the afternoon. Tomorrow's high 80, much colder by the weekend. 62 degrees now in Cincinnati.
Support comes from the Vision Therapy Studio. Whether you have difficulty keeping your place while reading, trouble driving at night, a lazy eye, or have suffered a brain injury, Dr. Beth Munzel and her dedicated team offer personalized solutions emphasizing improved visual function. Discover more online at visiontherapystudio.com. That's visiontherapystudio.com.
Good morning. It's 8:45, 63 degrees in Cincinnati. This is 91.7 WVXU. I'm Mary. Marianne Zalesnik, a long-standing low-head dam on the Whitewater River in Richmond, Indiana, is no more. Crews are nearly finished removing the Weir Dam. WVXU's Tana Weingartner went to Richmond to survey the project and has this report.
Construction sounds mingle with gurgling water as a pair of excavators remove chunks of concrete. The busted up rock and a pile of boulders are all that remain of the 110-year-old Weir Dam. Across the river, people watch as the large yellow machines do their work. Some, like Norm Bartley, used to fish from the deep pool created at the base of the dam.
Well, that used to be a really swift, deep hole right there. Actually kind of dangerous. But a bad undertow. I had my nephew dive off that dam one time to get my fishing pole back to the fish jerk in. He was all full before I knew what he was doing. I stopped him, man. That fishing pole wasn't worth that. But he got it back, but couldn't drown.
He was okay.
He was okay. He was a stupid 13-year-old teenager.
Others haven't been so lucky. Deadly low-head dams are often referred to as drowning machines. Jane and Jesse Bunker have also come to see how the work is going.
Yeah, we've been here all of our lives, and now they're taking it out. Things are changing.
What was your thought when you first heard they were going to take it out?
I kind of went, oh no, but then I heard where they might have it to where there's a canoeing down the river, down the gorge. So I thought, well, that might be kind of neat, you know.
Yeah, if they have canoes going up now, that would be pretty cool, but anything to try to revive Richmond a little bit.
What are your thoughts as you're seeing this right now?
It's a big job.
Phil Tevis of Flatland Resources is the person responsible for pulling off the big job. He's a landscape architect and environmental designer who's spent years advocating for removing dangerous dams across Indiana and Ohio.
The Weir Dam was installed in Richmond to be a water collection. It was a diversion for their city water, and the city no longer uses that water supply. So once it is an obsolete for its industrial purpose, then it poses a threat for either fish passage, which fish can't swim through, or people drown because they're recreation hazards. People get in the undertow and they drown, and or you can't canoe or kayak very safely around them. So those are the main reasons.
What is it about low water dams that makes them dangerous?
At a flood stage event or high flow event, the water circulating over the dam actually makes a reverse curve. And people that have let's say a life jacket, because life jackets is dependent upon non-air in the water, there's so much air in the water that then they get caught and pushed down under and they get trapped usually on the bottom side of the dam and drown.
And what's going to happen to all of the debris?
The concrete gets removed and goes to a dump site. The boulders that are here, those are the original dam. From what we can tell, the original dam. There's archaeologists here that work with us to record everything, so in future people can refer back to what was here. But the boulders are going to stay. The concrete is going to be removed, and the sediment that's behind it is being shaped to the natural curvature of the channel, the stream. And when it starts to flood, that sand will start to push through and will start to cleanse the river more like an open flowing stream.
What does taking the dam out do to the ecosystem above and below it?
The ecosystem immediately above has low oxygen, high temperatures, so the fish aren't as prevalent above the dam, and that will change. Now there will be more oxygen and more fish. Usually the first thing you see is darters, and then once you have darters, then the smallmouth come in afterwards. On the downstream side, people say that it's a great fishery. The reality is it's one pool that's a fishery. If you look at the length from here down about 1,000 feet, this area is starving in sand. If you don't have sand, then you don't have beds for the fish to spawn. So that sand that's upstream will equalize going through the system, and what you end up with is a longer area of healthier habitat.
So people who have maybe been concerned, they see like the drop in water levels above the stream as destroying the habitat. You're saying it's actually going to be better in the long run.
That is correct. It takes 3 to 5 years for the system to wash through. It depends upon how much or how many high water events are here. But once the system blows through, there's data all across the world that shows the fisheries immediately respond and improve. And then recreation usually comes shortly after that.
What do you think is the biggest misconception you've heard about taking out the dam?
Most people think we're lowering the water. The volume of water doesn't change whether it's there or not.
Tevis expects to be finished removing the dam by Friday. Tana Weingartner, 91.7 WBXU.
Support comes from Cincinnati World Cinema, presented Black Barbie, an inspiring film for everyone sharing the fascinating backstory about America's best-loved doll. Screening Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, October 6th, 7th, and 8th in the Garfield Theater. CincyWorldCinema.org.
Support comes from Hawksworth Blood Center, University of Cincinnati, the only provider of blood products to over 30 tri-state hospitals. Hawksworth operates 7 neighborhood donor centers in greater Cincinnati and northern Kentucky, making it convenient for you to join their mission in saving lives close to home. More information at hawksworth.org.
It's 8:50. This is 91.7 WVXU. In 10 minutes, it'll be time for the BBC NewsHour this morning. What's next for the Republican Party after the ouster of House Speaker Kevin McCarthy? Also, the U.S. targets Chinese firms with sanctions over fentanyl production. And the climate researcher who's refusing to fly back to work. It's all coming up on the BBC NewsHour. It starts at 9 o'clock on 91.7 WVXU. The Roebling Bridge closed because of climate protesters shutting it down. Southbound 75 before Galbraith, there's a wreck on the right shoulder. Traffic is slow from Glendale Milford. And eastbound 275 after Moscow, there's a wreck on the right shoulder. Traffic is slow from 75. 9 first morning weather, mostly sunny to mostly cloudy today. The high 86. Right now it's 63.
Local support for Marketplace Morning Report comes from Bartlett Wealth Management. Wealth management takes time that can be better spent managing a business. The experienced team at Bartlett helps cut through the noise of a complex financial situation so clients can focus on what they manage best, their businesses. More at Bartlett1898.com.
We're tracking the surge this month in interest rates, not directly engineered by the Federal Reserve, but a consequence of investors rushing to sell bonds.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by C3AI. C3 Generative AI provides ChatGPT enterprise search that is verifiable, secure, and accurate across all enterprise data. C3.ai. This is Enterprise AI.
I'm David Brancaccio. With the focus on the dramatic developments leading to a leaderless House of Representatives, don't miss what's happening in the bond market. A surge downward in recent days that amplifies the Fed's efforts to slow the economy. This bond sell-off, leading to higher costs for borrowing, carries a risk of turning a soft landing for the economy into a recession.
The last time, the only time I've ever seen market behavior that even comes close to this was in the 1990s.
Christopher Lowe is chief economist at FHN Financial in New York and a close observer of bond market psychology.
We had occasionally situations that we call buyer strikes. You know, the idea was the usual people who bought bonds were sitting on the sidelines. There would be issuance of debt. Nobody wanted to buy it at the current yield, so the yield would rise until we managed to lure enough people off the sidelines. And the way this usually ended in the 90s is interest rates would rise enough that we'd start to see economic data suggesting the economy was in trouble.
But the economy now, using standard measures, is still running strong. As for what prompted this fire sale of bonds this month in particular, Lowe says there wasn't a clear catalyst.
There's been Fed officials out speaking, and they're really not saying anything new. But I suppose that it could be that people are just taking them more seriously.
This morning, at least, the pressure is easing a bit, allowing the 10-year interest rate to settle down to 4.74% now. U.S. mortgage rates are up. The average 30-year fixed-rate mortgage went from 7.5% to 7.72% in a week, using Mortgage News Daily's calculation. Stocks after the big drops yesterday, S&P futures are up 0.2% now. About 85% of affluent households in the U.S. gave to charity last year, 3% fewer than back in 2020. The average amount the well-to-do gave went down as well by about 20%, to about $35K. All this according to an every other year survey from Indiana University and Bank of America. Here's Marketplace's Stephanie Hughes.
The drop in donations now follows a surge in generosity back in 2020. I think the need was...
The interesting question to ponder. To answer it, you really have to think about the kind of separate sets of incentives that Democrats and Republicans face right now, Democrats typically just don't do this. They sort of get in line for the most part, much to the frustration of some people on the political left.
Just as there are members who challenge her conclusions, who disagree with her, so do we from time to time. But that does not mean that there is a fundamental fracture or a dehumanizing going on within our caucus.
Nancy Pelosi led the Democratic Party for decades and never really faced super serious challenges to her authority. And part of that was because she was very good at her job. She was a very skilled tactician and manager, but also because Democrats kind of want to pass bills. They don't get rewarded for chaos. They just don't. There's not a lot of appetite for that among Democratic voters. That's not the case for Republicans. Republicans face a primary electorate that rewards them for just being, quote, fighters. One way to look at this is that Gates' success here just showed the next generation of crazy fighters that, yeah, you can bring down a speaker.
With that said, going back to where we started in January of 2023, when it took 15 votes for McCarthy to become speaker, I believe back then he said something like, you know, now that we've been through this, I can govern, you know, like we're ready to govern, we've been through the hardest part and we came out successfully. Obviously he misjudged his strength. Was this kind of destined to happen? This is a historic moment in American politics, but how surprising is this actually?
So, this is like the least surprising surprise. When McCarthy first became speaker, it was widely assumed that he was in trouble from the get-go, that he was going to be a weak speaker, he would not be able to govern, despite his vowing to the contrary. It was just like, how are you going to handle this soon, right? Where people are, you know, trying to lop off your head from the very beginning. What made people think he might survive was the debt ceiling deal, where he managed to strike a compromise with the president, get it through the House, and initially, it didn't look like he was facing any significant challenge to his leadership. There was not an immediate effort to depose him. I wrote, and other people wrote, a bunch of takes along the lines of, hey, maybe Washington underestimated Kevin McCarthy. As we got deeper and deeper into the government showdown, it became obvious that, oh no, McCarthy might really be in trouble, that he really is going to face a challenge, that there is going to be a vote on his leadership, and he might not survive it. So, in the end, the obvious take, the conventional wisdom that prevailed at the very beginning of his speakership, is what turned out to be correct. It just, there was a moment where it seemed like maybe he was going to surprise everyone.
Jordan Weissman is the Washington editor at Semaphore. You can read him at semaphore.com. Our program today was produced by Amanda Llewellyn and John Ahrens. We were edited by Matthew Collette, fact-checked by Laura Bullard, with help from Hadi Mawagdi, and mixed by David Herman and Patrick Boyd. I'm Sean Ramasfer, and this episode of Today Explained is over.
Yay.
Thanks so much for sharing your Wednesday with us. I'm Oakley Scott. If you missed our Saturday morning gardening show, Cultivating Place, you can catch it again tonight at 10. A best-of conversation with Maria Popova, the creator and writer behind The Marginalia. And if you're still hungry for more, Christopher Kimball's Milk Street Radio follows tonight at 11. A couple of thoughtful, cozy programs just perfect for this warm October night. Cincinnati Edition coming up in just a moment.
Support comes from 4C for Children and its Champions Gala, presented by PNC Bank, where you can walk the blue carpet at Cincinnati Music Hall, enjoy dinner, dancing, and more, while helping ensure local children and families have access to quality childcare. You can join the fun on November 4th. For event information and tickets, visit 4c4children.org/gala.
Here's a friendly reminder to you news junkies out there. WVXU can go with you wherever you go, so you remain connected to the tri-state community. Of course, we're on air at 91.7 and 88.5, online at WVXU.org, on your phone or tablet with our mobile app, and by asking your smart speaker to play WVXU.
This is Chris from Springfield, Illinois. I listen to Bullseye because regardless of who's on or what the show's about, I know it'll be smart, sincere, and funny.
I'm Jesse Thorne. This week, I'll talk with Sam Richardson, star of The After Party and Detroiters, plus all-star pitcher Sean Doolittle. That's on the next Bullseye from MaximumFun.org and NPR.
Saturday at 7 p.m. on 91.7 WVXU.
91.7 WVXU Cincinnati and 88.5 WMUP Oxford. News from Cincinnati Public Radio and NPR.
Ohio is seeing more cases of poisoning related to people eating wild mushrooms, all while interest in foraging has grown. We'll discuss how to forage safely while respecting the natural environment, and we'll get expert advice about identifying the fungus among us. This is Cincinnati Edition on 91.7 WVXU. I'm Lucy May. Also this hour, Cincinnati has a new Youth Poet Laureate. We'll talk with Gabrielle Walker about what the honor means to her and the themes she addresses in her work. And we'll hear why her poetry stood out to the selection committee that chose her. That's coming up next on Cincinnati Edition. First, the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Speer. The Senate Minority Leader says he's willing to wait for his GOP colleagues in the House to fix their problems before dealing with a spending measure. Mitch McConnell, however, said whoever assumes to see House Speaker Kevin McCarthy should do everything in their power to avoid a repeat.
I hope whoever emerges insists on getting rid of the motion of that guy.
It was that motion that allowed a small group of GOP lawmakers to force McCarthy from the Speaker's post. One item left out of the current short-term government spending bill is more money for Ukraine. A vote on a new permanent Speaker of the House isn't expected until next week. The trial of disgraced crypto mogul Sam Bankman-Fried got underway in earnest today. Attorneys for the prosecution and defense delivered opening statements. As NPR's David Gurr reports, Bankman-Fried is accused of orchestrating one of the largest financial frauds in history.
In their opening statement, the prosecution alleged that the wealth, power, and influence Sam Bankman-Fried had as the founder and CEO of the cryptocurrency exchange FTX was, as Assistant U.S. Attorney Thane Wren put it, built on lies. Bankman-Fried's defense team argued their client is not a villain, rather he was overwhelmed building and running a crypto empire that was valued at tens of billions of dollars before it collapsed late last year. This trial is expected to last 6 weeks. If Bankman-Fried is convicted on all 7 criminal counts against him, he could spend the rest of his life in prison. David Gurra, NPR News, outside the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan.
As student loan payments start back up again this month for millions of Americans, President Biden has canceled an additional $9 billion in student loan debt. The move affects some public service workers who qualified for a debt relief program but were caught up in red tape. Others who have been paying student loans for more than 20 years but missed out on forgiveness eligibility are also included. About 125,000 people affected by the latest round of loan forgiveness. Stocks regained some ground today after a big sell-off Tuesday. NPR's Scott Horsley reports the Dow Jones Industrial Average was up 0.4%.
Investors are still nervous about the prospect of rising interest rates, but not quite as nervous as they had been. A report from the payroll processing company ADP showed sluggish job growth last month, suggesting the Federal Reserve might not have to push rates even higher in its effort to combat inflation. That's in contrast to a report from the Labor Department Tuesday, which showed a surprising uptick in the number of job openings. Markets will get a more complete picture of the job market on Friday, when the government issues its monthly report on employment and unemployment for September. The yield on 10-year treasuries has dipped a bit after hitting a 16-year high. The Dow, which had slipped into the red for the year, is now roughly back to where it was at the beginning of January. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
Looking at the numbers, the Dow rose 127 points to 33,129. The Nasdaq was up 176 points. The S&P 500 gained 34 points today. This is NPR. Academy National Park and Preserve's Fat Bear Week has arrived. The annual event, which was under threat of being postponed by now averted government shutdown, celebrates the success of the park's bears in preparation for hibernation. Hunter Morrison with member station KDLL's story.
12 chunky bears are competing this week for the top spot bracket style, seeking the adoration of online fans around the world. Alaska's Fat Bear Week showcases a range of bears, which the public can observe on live stream cameras in the park.
Each bear in Fat Bear Week is an individual with a unique story to tell about life, survival.
That's Mike Fitz, resident naturalist with Explore.org. While the fat bears are the stars of this celebration, the unsung heroes are Katmai sockeye salmon, which have the healthiest and largest runs in the world. Without them, there would be no fat bears. You can vote for your favorite fat bear at Explore.org. Hunter Morrison, NPR News, Kenai, Alaska.
For at least some Americans, their COVID-19 vaccination cards were a source of pride during the height of the pandemic, but the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is moving on. The CDC says it has stopped printing the cards now that vaccines are no longer being distributed by the federal government. People who need it can still get proof of vaccination from a doctor or state health department. Health officials still recommend keeping the card in a safe place, though, if you still have it. Crude oil futures prices fell sharply today. Oil down over $5 a barrel, or 5.6%, and the session at $84.22 a barrel in New York. I'm Jack Spear, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Katina Foundation, supporting the Asylum Seeker Advocacy Project, providing more than 100,000 asylum seekers in the U.S. with community and legal support. Learn more at asylum.news.
26.
Public radio isn't something you think about all the time, but the stories you hear do stick with you. And the public radio podcasts are some of your favorites. And you do listen every day. WVXU is your station. Listeners like you keep it going strong. Please donate at WVXU.org. Thank you.
This episode of Cincinnati Edition was pre-recorded, so we can't take calls right now. This is Cincinnati Edition on 91.7 WVXU. I'm Lucy May. Since the start of the pandemic, foraging has increased in popularity as more people are looking for wild mushrooms and other edible plants in local forests. But across Ohio, poison centers are seeing an increase in people getting sick from eating wild mushrooms. And experts caution toxic mushrooms can look very similar to non-toxic ones. Today we're going to talk about the popularity of foraging and the precautions you should take while looking for mushrooms and other edible plants. My guests are Miami University Western Program Director and Professor of Biology, Nick Money. Welcome, Nick.
Hey, good afternoon.
Mushroom hunter and member of the Board of Directors for the Ohio Mushroom Society, Crystal Davidson. Thanks for being here, Crystal.
Thank you.
And Cincinnati Nature Center Public Programs Manager, Jason Newman. Welcome, Jason.
Hello.
We want to note that this discussion is meant to be general in nature and does not replace advice from poison control experts. We have a link to more information from the Cincinnati Drug and Poison Information Center on our website. And Miami University is a financial supporter of Cincinnati Public Radio. Do you have questions or comments about foraging and wild mushrooms? Give us a call at 513-419-7100 or email talk@wbxu.org. Nick, should the average person even be foraging mushrooms? As I mentioned poison control, the Cincinnati Drug and Poison Information Center says only an experienced mycologist could effectively differentiate between a toxic and non-toxic mushroom. What do you think, Nick?
What do I think about that? Foraging is a wonderful opportunity to get out into the woods and get in touch with the natural world and to see fungi and other organisms in the flesh. And you can do that without actually picking them, but of course a lot of people are interested in collecting mushrooms to cook them at home, and we can talk more about the pros and cons of that activity. But we should mention too that right now it's very, very dry. We've had very little rain recently, and so there's not a lot of wild fungi that can be seen in the woods, and so people like me are praying for heavy rainfall over the next few days.
Get it wet out there. What do you think, Crystal, about that, all the warnings that I just talked about?
I think with enough dedication and having an open mind to learning, amateurs can also effectively learn to differentiate edible fungi from poisonous ones. I think if you're a beginner just starting out,
It's never a bad idea to become familiar with the most toxic species in your area to begin with. And then once you know those, then you can expand your repertoire into the edible.
Okay. Know what to avoid first.
Exactly.
Yeah. Crystal, how much more popular has foraging become in recent years? And what do you think made it so much more popular during the pandemic?
Well, the simple fact that parks were one of the few places that were open that people were allowed to venture into, and it's easy to social distance when you're in the woods, so that certainly helped. There definitely was an explosion of interest in 2020. Before that, it was a growing activity, and it certainly has become more popular within pop culture. You see fungi and mushrooms represented in all sorts of different ways in pop culture as well. And so those factors combined really amped it up.
Jason, is there a back to the future aspect to this? Talk about how foraging has been so important to people over generations.
Absolutely has been. Not long ago, everybody had lived on a farm or by the land, and as they moved into cities, that was lost. So right now, there's a surge of that planting in your house or outside the house, back to the land ethic. Everybody wants to go out, and old people, young people, everybody wants to go out and find things. I'm seeing a lot of joy in that as well. Humans evolved to hunt, search, and find things. So there's a joy in that.
Yeah. And there, it sounds like Crystal mentioned parks, but you do need to be aware where you're allowed to do this foraging and exploring, right? What are kind of the rules to keep in mind about that?
Always check with the owner of that land, make sure it's okay. And at the same time, we always want to be sure things are clean. It's not by the side of a road or a industrial site.
Yeah. Are there, Nick, are there places where you should definitely not forage? I mean, I know, if I understand correctly, Cincinnati Nature Center, you can't just go foraging like